Dr. Elena Martinez didn't think much of the Alzheimer's patient who claimed his family had stolen everything from him. But when she found the legal documents hidden in his mattress, she realized his own children had him declared incompetent to steal his $50 million research fortune, and he was still mentally sharp enough to remember every betrayal. Room 247 at Sunset Manor looked like any other nursing home room. But the 78-year-old man sitting by the window wasn't like any other patient. Professor David Chen kept talking about a stolen Nobel Prize and missing millions. The staff dismissed it as typical dementia delusions. What they didn't know was that every word he spoke was true. His own children had orchestrated the perfect crime. They'd convinced doctors their brilliant father was losing his mind. They'd moved $50 million from his accounts while he was still coherent enough to know exactly what they were doing. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated what a genius remembers, even when everything else fades away. Welcome to Still Human, where the most heartbreaking stories hide behind medical diagnoses. If you believe that every person, regardless of their condition, deserves dignity and truth, hit subscribe. These stories of hidden genius and family betrayal need witnesses. Before we dive into Professor Chen's devastating story, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated because of their age or condition? Now, let's uncover the truth about what really happened to one of America's greatest minds. Sunset Manor Nursing Home sat on the outskirts of Pasadena, California, a sprawling facility that housed 200 elderly residents in various stages of cognitive decline. Dr. Elena Martinez had been the head of neurology there for 8 years, long enough to distinguish between genuine dementia and the stories patients told to make sense of lives that no longer made sense to them. Professor David Chen had been admitted 6 months earlier by his children, Dr. Michael Chen, a successful cardiologist, and Lisa Chen Morrison, a prominent attorney. They'd presented a heartbreaking case. Their brilliant father, a retired physics professor from Caltech, was suffering from early-stage Alzheimer's and could no longer care for himself safely. The paperwork was impeccable. Medical evaluations from 3 different specialists, legal documents signed by the best attorneys in Los Angeles. A conservatorship that gave his children complete control over his assets for his own protection. David Chen was 78 years old, with silver hair that still held traces of the black it had once been, and eyes that seemed to shift between sharp awareness and distant confusion. He spoke with a slight accent that betrayed his origins in Taiwan, though he'd lived in America for over 50 years. To the staff, he was a textbook case. He could remember complex physics equations from decades ago, but couldn't remember if he'd eaten breakfast. He could discuss quantum mechanics in perfect detail, but got lost trying to find the bathroom. Classic Alzheimer's pattern, long-term memory intact, short-term memory severely compromised. But there was something about Professor Chen that bothered Dr. Martinez, something in the way he watched the staff when he thought no one was looking, something in the way he responded to questions about his family with a sadness that seemed too coherent, too specific for someone with advanced dementia. The first sign that something wasn't right came during a routine evaluation. Dr. Martinez was reviewing Professor Chen's medication schedule when she noticed him writing frantically on a napkin during lunch. "Professor Chen?" she said gently, approaching his table. "What are you working on?" He looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp and focused. The Hamiltonian, he said quietly, for quantum field interactions in curved spacetime. Dr. Martinez glanced at the napkin. Where she expected to see the confused scribbles of a dementia patient, she found elegant mathematical equations that looked sophisticated, complex, purposeful. "Professor, did your children visit yesterday?" His expression changed immediately. The sharpness faded, replaced by something that looked like fear. "My children," he repeated slowly. "Yes, they worry about me. They say I'm sick. They say I imagine things." "What kind of things do you imagine?" "I imagine that I once had a laboratory. I imagine that I won awards for my work. I imagine that I had money in the bank." His voice carried a bitter sadness. "They tell me these are fantasies, symptoms of my disease." Dr. Martinez felt a chill. She'd worked with Alzheimer's patients for years, and this didn't sound like the typical confusion of memory loss. This sounded like someone who had been systematically convinced that his own memories were lies. "Professor Chen, can you tell me about your work at Caltech?" "Quantum field theory," he said immediately. "Particle physics. I developed a unified approach to quantum gravity that he stopped, pressing his hands to his temples. "But Michael says I was just a teaching assistant. Lisa says I only imagined being important." That evening, Dr. Martinez did something she rarely did. She Googled a patient. What she found made her stomach drop. Professor David Chen wasn't just a retired physics professor. He was one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists of his generation. Dr. Martinez stared at her computer screen in disbelief. Academic papers dating back to the 1970s, citations in hundreds of other scientific works. Photos of him receiving awards, giving lectures at international conferences, shaking hands with Nobel Prize winners. And then she found it. A news article from 18 months earlier. Caltech professor David Chen awarded Nobel Prize in Physics for breakthrough work in quantum field theory. The article was accompanied by a photo of Professor Chen, looking healthier and younger, holding a Nobel Prize medal worth not just prestige, but millions of dollars in patent rights and research grants. Dr. Martinez's hands trembled as she scrolled through more articles. Patent filings worth tens of millions of dollars, research contracts with tech companies. A man who had literally changed the understanding of quantum physics and made a fortune doing it. The next morning, she approached Professor Chen differently. "Professor," she said quietly, sitting beside him in the common room, "I'd like to ask you about your Nobel Prize." He looked at her with an expression that was utterly lucid. "You know about that? I looked you up. Your work on quantum field theory, the patents, the prize money." Tears formed in his eyes. "So it was real. I wasn't imagining it. It was real. You're one of the most accomplished physicists alive." Professor Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that chilled Dr. Martinez to her bones. "Then why am I here? And why do my children have power of attorney over assets I supposedly never had?" That night, Dr. Martinez couldn't sleep. Something was deeply wrong, and she needed to find proof. The next day, she made a decision that would change everything. "Professor Chen," she said during their daily meeting, "you mentioned that your children told you your memories weren't real. Do you have any documentation? Anything that might prove your version of events?" He looked around nervously, then gestured for her to come closer. "They took everything," he whispered. "All my papers, my awards, my computer. But—" he paused, looking around again. "I hid something before they brought me here. I was still sharp enough to know what they were planning." "What did you hide?" Legal papers, copies of documents, proof of what they did. Where? He smiled sadly. They searched my suitcase, my clothes, my books, but they didn't think to look in my mattress. Dr. Martinez felt her heart racing. Professor, would you be willing to show me? That evening, after the night shift began, Dr. Martinez quietly entered Professor Chen's room. With shaking hands, he guided her to a small tear in his mattress that had been carefully resealed. Inside was a manila envelope, carefully wrapped in plastic. The documents inside told a story that made Dr. Martinez feel sick. Power of attorney papers dated just 2 weeks after Professor Chen's Nobel Prize announcement. Medical evaluations that declared him mentally incompetent, despite the fact that he'd been giving lectures and conducting research just months before. Bank transfer records showing millions of dollars being moved from his accounts to accounts controlled by his children. But the most damning document was a recording device. An old digital recorder that Professor Chen had apparently used to document conversations with his children.
Dr. Martinez's hands shook as she pressed play. Michael Chen's voice came through clearly.
Dad, you need to understand. The Nobel Prize, the money, the recognition, it's too much for someone in your condition to handle. We're doing this to protect you.
Professor Chen's voice, much clearer than it was now.
Michael, I'm not confused. I know exactly what you're doing. This isn't about protection.
Lisa's voice. Dad, the doctors say your Alzheimer's is progressing rapidly. In 6 months, you won't remember any of this anyway. Why not let us handle your affairs while you can still enjoy a comfortable life?
Because it's my life, my work, my legacy. Michael, again, your legacy is secure, Dad, and this way you'll be taken care of forever.
The recording continued for over an hour, documenting how his children had systematically convinced medical professionals that their father was incompetent while privately acknowledging that he was still mentally sharp. Dr. Martinez knew she was holding evidence of one of the most sophisticated cases of elder abuse she'd ever encountered, but she also knew that going against the Chen family would be career suicide. Michael Chen was a prominent cardiologist, with connections throughout the medical community. Lisa Chen Morrison was a partner at one of LA's most powerful law firms. But looking at Professor Chen, seeing the pain in his eyes when he talked about his imaginary accomplishments, she knew she couldn't stay silent. The next morning, she called an emergency meeting with the nursing home's legal team.
I have reason to believe that one of our residents is the victim of financial abuse,
she began.
The nursing home's attorney, Robert Hayes, looked skeptical. Dr. Martinez, these are serious allegations. The Chen family has been nothing but cooperative and loving.
Their father has clear documentation of cognitive decline.
That documentation was falsified.
Dr. Martinez said quietly.
And I have proof.
She played the recordings.
The room fell silent as the voices of Michael and Lisa Chen revealed their true motivations. By the end of the recording, the nursing home administrator, Patricia Wells, was visibly shaken.
How long has Professor Chen been here under these conditions? She asked.
6 months. His children have been receiving his Nobel Prize money, his patent royalties, and his research grants, while he sits in that room believing his entire life was a delusion.
Robert Hayes leaned forward.
Dr. Martinez, are you absolutely certain about the authenticity of these documents? The recording device was found in Professor Chen's possession. The bank records match public filings, and most importantly, Professor Chen's cognitive abilities are far higher than his medical records suggest. Patricia Wells made the decision. We need to contact Adult Protective Services immediately, and we need an independent psychiatric evaluation of Professor Chen. 3 days later, Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a court-appointed psychiatrist with no connection to the Chen family, spent 4 hours evaluating Professor Chen. Her conclusion was devastating. Professor Chen shows signs of mild short-term memory loss consistent with normal aging, but no evidence of the severe cognitive impairment described in his previous evaluations. His long-term memory is intact, his reasoning abilities are sharp, and his understanding of his situation is completely lucid. The confrontation happened in the nursing home's conference room on a gray Tuesday morning. Michael and Lisa Chen had been told there was a routine review of their father's care plan. They arrived expecting a standard meeting. Instead, they found their father sitting at the conference table flanked by Dr. Martinez, the nursing home's legal team, and a representative from Adult Protective Services. Professor Chen looked different. For the first time in months, he sat with the bearing of a man who knew his own worth. "Michael, Lisa," he said quietly, "I'd like my life back." Michael Chen's face went pale. "Dad, you're confused. You're not well." "I am well enough to remember every conversation we've had about my supposed incompetence," Professor Chen replied. "I'm well enough to remember the day you convinced Dr. Patterson to diagnose me with severe Alzheimer's after I'd spent the morning solving equations that most physicists can't even understand." Lisa tried to maintain control. "Dad, this is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that concerned us. You're imagining conspiracies that don't exist." Dr. Martinez placed the manila envelope on the table. "Mrs. Chen Morrison, are you familiar with these documents?" Lisa's confident expression cracked as she recognized the papers she thought had been destroyed. The Adult Protective Services representative, Maria Santos, spoke for the first time. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, you're both being investigated for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. The evidence suggests you systematically conspired to have your father declared incompetent in order to gain control of assets worth approximately $50 million. Michael stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Our father has Alzheimer's. We have medical documentation. Medical documentation that was obtained after you told physicians your father was showing symptoms he wasn't actually experiencing," Maria Santos interrupted. "Documentation that contradicts independent evaluation by court-appointed specialists." Professor Chen spoke again, his voice steady and clear. "For 6 months, you've let me believe that my entire career was a delusion. You've let me think that the Nobel Prize was something I imagined. You've convinced me that my life's work never existed." Tears rolled down his cheeks, but his voice remained strong. "Do you have any idea what it's like to lose your memory and be told that even your clearest recollections are lies? Do you know what it's like to doubt your own sanity because the people you trust most tell you that your greatest achievements were fantasies?" Lisa Chen Morrison finally broke. "Dad, we thought you wouldn't remember. The doctors said your condition would progress quickly. We thought we were protecting the money for when you really couldn't manage it anymore. So you decided to steal my dignity along with my fortune." The legal proceedings took 6 months. Michael and Lisa Chen were charged with elder abuse and fraud. They were required to return every dollar they had taken, along with paying damages for the emotional harm they had caused. Professor Chen was moved to an assisted living facility that specialized in caring for high-functioning individuals with mild cognitive issues. For the first time in months, he had access to his own money, his own decisions, and his own dignity. Dr. Martinez visited him regularly. During one visit, she found him in his apartment, working on equations at a desk covered with physics journals. "Professor," she said, "how are you adjusting?" He looked up and smiled, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "Dr. Martinez, do you know what the most painful part of the last 6 months was?" "The betrayal." "No, it was thinking that I'd never actually contributed anything to the world, that my work was meaningless, that my Nobel Prize was a delusion created by a diseased mind." He gestured to the papers on his desk. "I've been reviewing my research, not because I don't remember it, but because I wanted to make sure it was real. And you know what I discovered?" "What?" "I'm still capable of breakthrough work. My mind is still sharp enough to push the boundaries of human knowledge. My children didn't just steal my money, they almost stole my belief in my own capabilities." Dr. Martinez felt tears in her eyes. "What will you do now?" "I'm going back to work. Caltech has offered me a consultant position. At 78, with mild memory issues, I'm still sharper than most physicists half my age. And now I know that for certain, not because someone told me, but because I've proven it to myself." He paused, looking out the window at the California hills. "My children taught me something valuable, Dr. Martinez. They taught me that the cruelest theft isn't taking someone's money, it's taking their sense of self-worth. But they also taught me that no one can steal what you've truly accomplished. The Nobel Prize is real. My research is real. My contributions to human knowledge are real. And your family?" His expression grew sad but resolute. "Michael and Lisa will have to live with what they've done. I hope someday they understand that they didn't just betray their father. They betrayed every principle I tried to teach them about integrity and honor." Professor David Chen returned to Caltech 6 months later, not as a full-time faculty member, but as a research consultant. His first project was developing educational programs to help medical professionals better distinguish between genuine cognitive decline and the effects of emotional trauma on elderly patients. Dr. Elena Martinez left Sunset Manor and now works with Adult Protective Services, specializing in cases of elder abuse. She's helped uncover dozens of similar cases where families have exploited medical diagnoses to steal from vulnerable relatives. The Chen case became a landmark in elder abuse law, establishing new protections for elderly individuals and requiring independent verification of competency claims involving significant assets. As for Professor Chen's Nobel Prize research, it continues to influence physics today. But perhaps more importantly, his story has influenced how society treats its aging population. At his last public lecture at Caltech, Professor Chen said something that resonated far beyond the world of physics. "Memory may fade, but wisdom endures. Dignity may be challenged, but it cannot be destroyed. And the value of a human being is not determined by what they can remember, but by what they have contributed to the world." The most devastating theft isn't always financial. Sometimes it's the theft of identity, of dignity, of the basic human right to trust your own memories and achievements. Professor David Chen's story reminds us that cognitive decline doesn't erase a lifetime of accomplishment, that families who exploit medical diagnoses for financial gain commit a crime that goes far beyond money. They steal the very essence of who their loved ones are. In nursing homes across America, there are brilliant minds being dismissed as confused, accomplished individuals being treated as burdens, and extraordinary people being reduced to medical conditions. The next time you encounter someone with memory issues, remember Professor Chen. Remember that behind the confusion might be a Nobel Prize winner, a war hero, a loving parent, or someone who changed the world in ways you can't imagine. Have you ever witnessed someone being diminished because of their age or condition? Share that story in the comments below. At Still Human, we believe that every person, regardless of their cognitive state, deserves dignity, respect, and the right to their own truth. Subscribe for more stories that remind us to see the human being behind the diagnosis and to protect the vulnerable from those who would exploit their trust. Because sometimes the most brilliant minds come in packages that the world has learned to overlook.